Thank you very much to the panel. And same thing, we're just going to ask a question, kind of future looking and also sort of somewhat relative to our industry. And we'll start with our hosts here in Rhode Island. Speaker Pro Tem of the Rhode Island House, Representative Brian Patrick Kennedy. Representative, we talked a little bit about this with Chairman Abney, who unfortunately had to leave. A state like Rhode Island has tremendous resources in both its tourism and its beautiful coastline, its maritime industry. But there are some indicators that what has other been a fairly good economy for several years is softening in part. And as a leader in Rhode Island who has to look at, balancing priorities of sort of maintenance of existing programs or enticing new business while also doing the core functions of government. You talk a little bit about sort of as a leader, you think about the budgeting process and sort of working with businesses to keep Rhode Island as healthy economically as possible.
Well, first of all, I'm glad everyone had the opportunity, wherever you had to come from. Those of us who live in Rhode Island, we already know what a great state it is, and hopefully you've enjoyed it enough that you'll want to come back next year, hopefully in the summer when the weather is warmer and it'll be sunny outside. Right now, we're already looking at a structural deficit in the state of Rhode Island, which has us concerned because while revenues are up, we're also looking at the fact that one of the initiatives of our Speaker Mattiello, has been the phase out of the car tax in the state of Rhode Island. We've got 2 more years to go. That will then be fully phased out, but it's costing the state of Rhode Island every year that we have to put more money into the budget in order to address that particular municipal tax that's paid for at the municipal level. So that, I think, is going to be our biggest issue, along with the overall state budget itself. The other couple of things that I want to quickly address, if you've been reading the papers locally, then you know that there's a big controversy in Rhode Island regarding IGT, which is the lottery provider, and the ability as to who is going to get that billion-dollar contract that the governor right now is looking to offer as a no-bid contract. And we've got different players that are available, but we also have a lot of good-paying jobs that we don't want to see lost to the state of Rhode Island. We're looking at the fact that our gambling revenues are down. Connecticut casinos, they're seeing the same issue. Massachusetts now has casinos, so that's down. And then we've got to look at the whole issue of marijuana, the regulation of it, and whether, in fact, we're going to open it up to allow for recreational use. Right now we strictly have medical marijuana. So we've got a multitude of issues we have to look at, and then starting this coming Friday, we've got the state of Rhode Island taking over the Providence City School District, and Central Falls is not far behind. So we're looking at a number of issues that we're going to, unlike many other states that have short sessions, we'll be going back on the first Tuesday of January next year and probably not finishing until the last week of June. So we've got a full plate before we've even arrived in January.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Young, you sit on the Ways and Means Committee in the state of Vermont. You represent, arguably one of the most rural districts in New England. And you have to balance a lot of things as well, kind of building off of some of the challenges that Representative Kennedy referenced. Can you talk about how you approach sort of budgeting and maybe sort of touch on, because we know you're very passionate about connectivity to rural areas, how you balance priorities and investment, how you think about sort of utilizing sort of general budgeting and taxes versus bonding of infrastructure, and what are the priorities and thoughts you're going to bring to the 2020 session on those issues?
Yeah, truthfully, how do we do the budgeting is, it's like right now with the Republican governor, it's kind of like whatever we can get away with. He had Governor Scott as his guiding principle was just no new taxes about anything, but it made it so that you couldn't restructure fees or really couldn't look at anything. So he's softened a little bit in his second term, and willing to look at a few different things. But, interestingly, so the Ways and Means Committee, we're raising the money for whatever the budget is, but we've actually had a really bipartisan process around the budget, even though, you know, the governor vetoed the budget. We actually only had one no vote in the entire House. So we created a budget that everybody agreed on 1 year because they were too conservative, and 1 year one person voted because they were too liberal. But if you've actually got 99% of the body all agreeing on it, it's pretty ridiculous that the governor would veto it. So we actually, you know, I mean, for all of the divisiveness of, I think, of national politics, you know, the Vermont legislature still actually just kind of grinds away and does the work. And then just kind of on rural, you know, the challenges of rural telecommunications, just it's kind of a perennial issue in Vermont. And, you know, as the state, I would say, like, kind of the approach as of last year is the state kind of gave up really taking a strong role in it, and we pushed it off to the local communities and said, why don't you guys try it, because we can't do it. So we've decided that the least resourced communities in the state should, you know, tackle the issue on their own. And disappointment to me, but that's where we've landed.
Well, that's a good jumping off point to our next panelist, Jim Porter, who's been regulating utility and telecommunications in Vermont for several years. Jim, I think, you know, you and I have spoken about, and you've spoken about with a number of folks in our industry, the challenges of sort of balancing sort of maintenance and oversight of legacy networks, new technologies and new entrants coming into the state, both at the sort of at the community level and you know, funded by either ERA grants or otherwise in the past, and then sort of the newer providers who tend to be a little more fiscally helpful, like a newer than a phone company, investing in Vermont. Can you talk about your approach to sort of working with all of us in our state, you know, maintaining parity, maintaining conversations, ensuring folks are kind of coordinating on things like 911 and that sort of stuff to make sure that Vermont consumers are getting the services they deserve?
Yes, sure, and it's funny when you talk about the old networks. We're in the middle of a plain old service quality investigation with the telephone company now, and I think about 6 years ago, I thought that would have been our last one, but here we go again. But that, you know, remains important. As Representative Young said, we've had a little bit of a shift in our broadband model, which I heard someone from Connecticut yesterday say you have 99% penetration. That was kind of depressing for me to hear. Good for Connecticut. And then Commissioner Peterson, when she talks about Western Massachusetts and the success they had there, I think that's something that I think we did start those relationships in Vermont that led to that. And I hope that will turn around for us a little bit. As I look at our funding legislator here on my right, but I think that is a very direct and easy route for us to take. Well, easy except for the funding.
That's great. Well, we have about 5 minutes left, and we're running a little bit behind, so I would encourage everybody. I've got a final question for each of the panelists to hopefully answer in about 1 minute, but I'd like for everybody to move directly to Brenton Hall for our final panel on the future of sports. But I'm going to kind of give you a higher level version of what I asked Chairman Arcani, which is, you know, in this time of divisive and emotional debate at a number of levels, as state leaders, how do you reconcile sort of the passion with the need for sort of data and diligence in lawmaking and rulemaking?
That's an interesting one.
Don't we know?
In the state of Rhode Island, I guess you could say, we have very good relations with the Senate. We have very good relations with the minority party as well. So as far as the General Assembly goes, we don't have a lot of issues. Now, we do have issues with the fact that the progressives amongst the Democrats almost are a party unto themselves. And then there's the governor. So I think that is one of the more difficult things that has to be addressed right now. The relations with the governor are not that great. And hopefully moving forward, there'll be somewhat of a peace treaty as we move forward, because we recognize that we're not going to be able to build a budget or get any of the important programs through that need to pass in the upcoming legislative session unless there's buy-in from the executive chamber. So I would expect that we'll see the Speaker as well as the Senate President working to try to mend relations with the governor's office.
That's great. And Sam, you actually referenced in the budget how well Democrats and Republicans, and there is a legitimate third party in Vermont, in the Vermont Progressive Party. How do you balance sort of the idealism and passion versus the need to sort of be data-driven and diligent?
You know, I guess I really just try and kind of de-escalate and not feed into it. I really just, I mean, to the degree that I can, I guess being an incumbent, I don't have to like, you know, put in all these barbs or like, I just really try and like not participate in the fiery rhetoric. And like when there's, you know, an issue on the floor, really actually try and interrogate it. And, you know, we're you know, Vermont faces a lot of problems, and we're not going to be able to solve those problems if it's, you know, truly divisive. And Vermont's a very liberal state, and I mean, I guess I end up being kind of the moderate side of the Democratic Party in Vermont, which would probably be super liberal anywhere else. But, you know, I don't know. I guess I try and bring some of my progressive colleagues back to reality slowly and gently by the arm.
And Jim, I think you've been an example of a professionally apolitical regulator focused on the work for several years. How do you maintain that discipline in this day and age?
Well, I'm on my third governor that I work for, 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, so it does help to be apolitical in that sense.
And you're a Southern gentleman, that probably helps too, isn't it?
Well, and despite my accent, I was born here. But from my perspective at the politics, coming from Alabama 15 years ago, a Republican in Vermont couldn't be a Democrat in Alabama. So when we talk about the Vermont divides, they really are much more harmonious than what certainly we were used to in the South. And everybody seems to work together, I think, a lot, despite political differences that are, you know, moderate.
That's it. Well, thank you so much to the panelists, our previous panelists, and I encourage you all folks to head over to Brenton Hall for the Future of Sports panel, which I promise you will be a fascinating end to this conference. Thank you, everybody.